Hi and welcome, my name's David. I'm going to be doing a little presentation about my Pedagogic Creed. Just pop over here and say hi. I'm going to switch between this view and the PC view. This is how I'm going to do this. And yeah, so let's get this started. I'll just talk about my educational background and just my worldview background. I dug up this photo. I don't know if you can see me, but that's me back in 1986, and that's me right there. An interesting thing here at Elizabeth High, they had a mixed home group, so we've got quite, I was one of the youngest there at that time. There's a big mixed group. Something very interesting, reflecting back on it, was something I found quite powerful, being able to mix with the older kids in my little home group. I'm not sure if that's done these days, but it's definitely something I would recommend. It gave me opportunities to mix with a lot of older kids and so on. Anyway, back on my background, I'm going to just try and get through this quickly. So I have a low socioeconomic background. I grew up in the Rust Belt of Adelaide, attended Elizabeth Grove Primary School. One thing I would say is I never really realised that I was attending, growing up in a disadvantaged area. I thought, everything was always like this across the board. This is just how schools were, and everyone went and did something like this. It's my viewpoint as a child. So then I ended up at Christie's Beach High School after a bit of a family breakdown. So I was then finished high school up there with being looked after by a single parent mother who turned religious, and probably had mixed feelings about the religion and its impact on my life, but nonetheless I was part of it. I ended up working at Kmart through the later years of high school. I think brought in some interesting positive work ethics there, and I had a desire to become quite independent. I have a younger adopted Sri Lankan sister and an older sister. Sri Lankan sister's 1 year older than me, and my bigger sister's 2 years older than me. Now, post-graduating, my Christie's Beach High School certificate, I did all the PES courses, Maths 1 and 2, Chemistry, Music, Accounting. I ended up going into electrical engineering, and I was a little disappointed with my score coming out of school, but I was pretty happy to have passed first time around. Just a lot of my buddies and peers just all going back to do year 13, and there was a lot of parental pressure from my mother to make sure that I didn't waste a whole year going back to do year 13, which in hindsight might have been an actual good thing, but there was so much pressure there that it was a waste that I, scraped in a score good enough to get me. I could probably talk a little bit later about why I felt I only scraped in a good enough score. At this point, we'll just keep moving. So just a couple of interesting images I dug up off my old Facebook. That's on the left there, that's a little arts play in probably about year 5, Elizabeth Grove Primary. That's me in the fly suit. And on the right there, that's me on a university. I was working for Flinders University there, so I'd gone through and graduated. I'd studied apprenticeship in electronics, and then I got a job there with Flinders Uni, and we were out putting these devices on the bottom of the East Pacific rise, and funnily enough, I had my clarinet on board that whole time. So just got some notes here about my sort of work background. I worked at Flinders Uni, Earth Sciences as an electronics tech, and then I ended up working at Adelaide Uni electronics again. And then I'm guessing at a certain point I started missing the music and arts. And hearing that when I was working at Adelaide Uni, all the students studying and whatever, I think it sort of lit something up inside me again. So I went and studied a music certificate, and then I ended up in the conservatorium. Did my my conservatorium course, and I ended up working for Reeds Australia, which was kind of fun for a while. But it's trumpet player would be interested in making trumpets, but they don't want to make trumpets for a living. So whilst it was kind of interesting, it's not the kind of thing I wanted to continue doing. And then I had this grand idea that I could start a business, and it would support my artistic endeavours. So I could just run this business on the side, and after I'm done setting it up and it's like my little money making machine, I could then be free to pursue whatever artistic endeavours was I wanted. Absolutely did not work out that way. So I've got a note there. If I can just change this. I came to acutely understand the market and business forces, its war. I understand the neoliberal market views through personal experience. So what I was trying to say there is, like, running a small business for nearly coming on 20 years. I learnt that it's a fight for your survival. Ultimately, we come up with certain products and services as a small business that I noticed were a niche in the market, and then before you know it, someone's doing something similar, and you are competing for your very survival, or just to make them look bad, and just wanting to score a bigger piece of the market, which inherently makes your life more profitable. But then things can turn, and suddenly you're on the bottom side, and so I refer to being in business as it's like being at war with your competitors. And I guess I'll get back to that type of highly competitive market in a school setting as we move on. Yeah. Just wanted to talk briefly about what qualities have allowed me to be successful. If I define my life as successful, graduated from high school, graduated from uni. My parents never managed to go to university. I started a business. I've ran that for nearly 20 years, and got a house and a car, although they're all mortgaged. I don't know how you define success, but the qualities I reflected on were resilience, empathy, compassion, critical thinking, creative thought. The resilience, ultimately, things didn't always go my way. Quite often they weren't, and had to start off on a bit of a back foot, really, I feel. And so these kind of qualities, empathy, compassion, being able to see the world from another person's point of view, has just been invaluable in my life, I feel. And it just helps you even in very simple day-to-day interactions where you're meeting a business client or selling somebody something, or just whatever it is, being able to understand the world from another's point of view, understand what their needs are and empathise with those, have compassion for their situation. This makes to a much nicer place to live in. And being able to think critically. And my other note there, creative thought. I think creative thought has really benefited me in business, running my own business, and just being able to think up creative ways to to you know, differentiate yourself from your competitors and so on. Now, so I wanted to talk about the readings that I've gone through in the course and things that had inspired my you know, my pedagogical beliefs. A quote from Sen: all humans have a right to choice in determining their life trajectories and should be provided with the tools that allow them to flourish. So yeah, I you know, believe that this has really influenced my belief, you know, that education should be viewed as a fundamental right. You know, it's a real basic right, and I think it's a tragedy in some ways that we are denying a lot of disadvantaged kids that choice in determining their life trajectories. Then I wanted to talk about Nussbaum's reading, Education for Freedom. And I mean, ultimately, if you've read her work and articles, is very convincing argument that we should be producing decent world citizens who can understand global problems and have practical competence and motivational incentives to do something about them. I mean, ultimately, the other side of the coin, being education for profit, ultimately gives rise to so many inequalities that probably out of the scope of this video, and I notice I'm already way over time. But you know, that's what I stand for: education for freedom. And you know, I just wanted to make some notes there about what this education produces in people, and one that was hit home with me there was self-criticism, being able to actually, you know, look back on your own influences and that sort of thing. People who can think freely and critically. Number 2 there, see oneself as a member of a diverse world. You know, being, you know, we're all connected in this world and we've all got different viewpoints and come from different backgrounds, and realising that, you know, you're just another brick in the wall ultimately, and that all bricks have the right to existence. And it's probably a bad analogy, but you know what I'm saying, that we're all members and we all need to get along out here in the world, and let's create a fair and equal place to do it. And the narrative imagination is another thing that Nussbaum brought up, which what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. And I think, you know, having an adopted sister helped me develop quite a decent dose of empathy. Saw a lot of injustice there. All right, so now I wanted to talk a tiny bit about Fiesta, and this is going to run way over time, which, you know, I'm sort of coming to terms with what Fiesta is talking about, and the learnification of education, and loaded language. And, you know, I'd like to believe that people always have the best at heart, and the you know, is the value. Let me just read this out so I'll probably position my thoughts here. Learning or education, becoming aware that the language reposition teachers from the heart of education to the sideline. you know, the loadedness of this type of language. I would like to believe that policymakers and society at large will have the best interests at heart for students, but I'm concerned no one really seems to have a solution to the problems faced in schools, and it seems that the neoliberal market pressures just seem to be eroding away at these things. That's what I took from Fiesta's reading, which kind of opened my eyes that, you know, sometimes these things just tend to slip away. Before you know it, you're faced with a bit of a, you know, whole new view of teachers, and we're no longer teaching, we're just facilitating learning, or we're standing on the sideline. I'd hate to think that it was done on purpose, that someone was, you know, had that idea that this is the way it should be. But at this point, I'm not so sure. If we want marginalised populations to have true choices in their lives and capabilities that are meaningful to them, they have to be participants in forming solutions. So there's another quote from Sen there that really resonated with me, that, you know, the marginalised populations need a voice, and they need to know that they have that right to a voice too. And at this point I started thinking that, well, you know, I'm contemplating all these issues in schools, and I haven't been in a school for so long, and I wanted to say that there's a need for some real world experience for me in the current version of the school. I feel I'm just doing a lot of hypothesising without really seeing what the real situation is. And also want to look at Fiesta's 3 domains of education, just briefly, that the qualification, socialisation, and subjectification. And I guess my main take home from reading about, you know, Fiesta's views there on education, that to focus heavily on one is to really deny at possible high costs. I think I made a note there. To focus on one area will potentially come at a great cost to another. So, you know, like to focus highly on the, say, subjectification or getting good grades can come at a great cost to, you know, the socialisation side of it. You know, their personal interactions and so forth, and becoming aware of that balance, you know. I guess I'm really quite interested to see how that is playing out in schools, because they're really pushing the standardised testing and all that stuff now, and I guess it's all a big wait and see for us. And I mean, I'm running out of time, but I really wanted to just press on something that influenced me a lot, and that's Sean's story. And I haven't referenced it properly, but it was a story about a young guy, you know, in a Rust Belt. You know, felt like I was talking about me, and and how, you know, he was having to juggle the pressures of being that guy in school to get along with his peers, yet he knew that he needed to do well in his education to perform. And I think I wanted to reflect back on how I just got enough of a grade to get into uni. Literally like by a couple of points. And that ultimately had limits on my choices and so forth, although more limits limiting factors was social influences from my family and stuff as to where that went. But the point that came out of Sean's story was that the external societal influences on Sean couldn't really be counted at a school level. And I guess, you know, reflecting on my own schooling, I think that's true. Apologise for going over time here. This is kind of dragging right on. And then, you know, another things that really upset me was the seemingly unjust distribution of public funding to schools, and I was looking at, you know, various documents that have been pulled out of my school websites and the funding and so on, and it just seems wrong, morally wrong, and I'm just wondering how I didn't know about it for so long. Have I been living under a rock all these years? Just, you know, it's opening my eyes. So quickly, I try to put some slides together to what concerns me, the overarching neoliberal influences that will be present in my classroom. Which Roger Slee got me thinking about, which just, you know, briefly, like globalizing education policy, the rise of competitive individualism, and, you know, things like students' mistakes no longer being something to learn from, but a flaw in the school performance, and you know, where's it going to stop? I guess was my wonder. You know, and then I started thinking, well, will I be pressured to filter or channel students to make the school look good? You know, what freedoms will I really have when it comes to enacting democratic and student-centered pedagogies, you know? Where will my students end up? The unequitable, I think I just touched on that before, educational outcomes across the state. What I see is money buys knowledge, and looked at a very concerning layout of school grades across the Adelaide area. It was pretty much a map of, you know, economic distribution of money in the state, and I, you know, just found it was so unjust. And it concerned me that here we are in 2020, and that there's even a need in pre-teacher services to disrupt their prejudices. But I guess the reality is this is where we are, and it's still alive and well. It's somewhat saddening. Is it possible to make a meaningful difference to ingrained thought processes, long held beliefs in such a short time? At this point I would like to take a moment's break, but so video is going so long, and so now, you know, the other thing that concerned me, that Nigel had downgraded his vision from education can change the world to a working towards view. I guess my heart sank a little. The big optimist. So I started thinking, well, what am I going to do about it? What could I possibly do? And I thought, well, I can cultivate sympathy through my music teaching, give a voice to as many forms of music as I can, thereby exposing my students to the perspectives and needs of other cultures and people. Show respect for all forms of music. Demonstrate self-criticism by critically reflecting on my own bias. Work towards equity in education. Work towards a neighbourhood model where one's best school is their local school. I guess, you know, I read the article from a Swedish guy who's come here to help in policy, and I was a bit jealous when I read that, you know, over in Sweden, that the best school is just their local school. I was, well, why can't we have that? What are we doing wrong? And then I basically, well, what do I want, you know, from, you know, my beliefs, my pedagogical creed, where's it going, and what are the outcomes going to be from the way I want to teach? And it was a quote that came up: the community must want for all children what we want for our own. I think that was from Dewey. And I just mentioned there about the Swedish system, but, you know, I just kept thinking, well, why aren't the disadvantaged kids, you know, revolting in the streets? And why? It's because, you know, well, I was one of them at one point, and I didn't feel disadvantaged. I guess I came to be slowly aware of it, but it was hard to acknowledge that. And so the reality is we should be preparing students to be adaptable and be enabling them to carve out a meaningful place in the market-driven society within which they will find themselves. I would like to see my students be passionate, critical thinkers with a love of learning. I believe education has the power to be transformational. I believe education should show students that anything is possible. I believe education should be democratic and student-centered. I believe education should allow students to envisage a gamut of life trajectories. I believe that education should produce decent humans that can lead a life worth living in a world that's worth living in. And I know I've ripped off Nussbaum there, but it is a great line. And I believe education should impart a love of learning. You know, these are all the things I believe. I believe that education should help kids find their passion and give them the courage and tools to pursue it. And I believe that it should encourage them to dream big and be the best they can. And I know I'm way over, but in summary, I believe that all students can and do learn, and what they learn is what society at large thinks of them. And this is a quote. I can't remember. I couldn't find it in the short time I was just trying to add in my summary. But, you know, I see this ultimately as where the challenge in education is right now. That's in breaking down these walls of ignorance in the community and showing students that they have the right to any imagination of their own future, to project themselves into whatever future it is they want for themselves. This is only going to come when we can reproduce sympathetic critical thinkers through what has been termed education for freedom from all schools. And I believe that teachers can and do make a difference in the lives of their students, and to have enabled just one student to believe in themselves and to follow their passion will have made it all worthwhile. I can't believe how long this video is taking. So I just want to cut it out and just say thanks for watching and stay safe. Sorry, I'm a bit emotional during that